G'day mates, Jacaro Toro here, and on this channel I focus on Australian Aborigines, their languages, culture, history, and so on. And this is a video in the series about Australian Aboriginal religion. And in this video I would like to talk about storytelling. So traditional Australian Aboriginal storytelling. So perhaps you might ask, is there a connection to religion here? Well, I would say that there definitely is. I read an article by Peter Sutton where he discusses Australian Aboriginal storytelling. And he writes that in traditional storytelling, even in stories where there are no Dreamtime beings involved, no Dreamtime events, so stories that need to be considered more historical. Even there, Aborigines would mix actual events, memories of actual events, with legends, things that didn't happen. And Sutton quotes Bronislaw Malinowski, who already in 1926 wrote the following: "Immediate history, semi-historic legend, and unmixed myth flow into one another, form continuous sequence, and fulfill the same sociological function." Unquote. Yes, so according to Sutton, this is what is going on in traditional Aboriginal storytelling. Much like as in the so-called historical parts of the Old Testament in the Bible, historians have found that there are definitely kernels of truth there, but we also get a lot of semi-historic legends and myths. Things that definitely have never happened in real life, regardless of what the evangelicals might say. I was an evangelical at one point, by the way. Not anymore. So anyway, this understanding stands in stark contrast to the earliest understanding about Australian Aboriginal storytelling. And to be sure, there are people who have had this view later on as well, that in Aboriginal storytelling there was a lot of old historical information preserved. Information such as the creation of crater lakes 10,000 years ago, extinct megafauna, ice age land bridges, and even the arrival of homo sapiens in the continent Sahul, which existed at one point. But this is not the dominant modern view then. The dominant modern view is that much historical information has been quickly forgotten in the Australian Aboriginal context, at times actually actively suppressed, even genealogical information further back than, say, 2 or 3 generations. So much historical information has been forgotten, except for things that have been selected to be retained and that have been turned to myth. Yes. Now, let's look at some examples, shall we? So, there is this story that one Aboriginal group has about Captain Cook visiting the upper Victoria River system, the Victoria River, which is the longest river in Australia's Northern Territory. Captain Cook is, of course, a historic figure. We know a lot about him. We have his logs that he wrote from his ships when he was a captain. By the way, see my video about Captain Cook. But there is nothing in his logs to indicate that he traveled inland on Australian rivers. So how has this story come about? Well, who knows? But it would seem that the people who created this story were unconstrained by historical facts, so to speak. We have on the Cape York Peninsula in the northeast of Australia the Aurochun tribe, which tells stories about Dutch exploration in the area. And in the stories, Dutch exploration took place from around 1870 up to 1950. That is the time span in which they place Dutch exploration. But in reality, this took place in the 17th and 18th centuries. Here, this seems to have started with a mission superintendent who brought a book about Dutch exploration in earlier centuries in the area. And Sutton actually suggests that these modern stories may be a mix of information from the book and actual memories that have been retained and passed down through the generations. What he bases that opinion on, I wouldn't know. I would think that otherwise it would seem reasonable to think that the information comes from the book, but I don't know. Anyway, when Christianity is spread, it is very common to place biblical stories and biblical myths in the local landscape. This has happened in many places around the world. I saw a documentary on TV, for example, about a place in Japan where people are Catholics. And they have stories about how Jesus visited that place during his life. Fancy that. And we get the same thing in Australia. So we have Noah's Ark stranding in Western Australia, not only on Mount Ararat, which is what evangelicals usually say, but also in Western Australia. And similarly, Jesus lived and died in Nambucca Heads in New South Wales, as it turns out. Yes, so traditional Aboriginal storytelling, unconstrained by what actually happened, even though they make reference to historical events often. So, since this is all for today, I guess the only thing left to say is, see you later.